Hello and welcome to the craft room. In today's video I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can combine alcohol inks with transparencies to create some beautiful pieces that you can use on your cards, scrapbook pages, or other paper crafting projects. So let's get started. For this project you're going to need some transparency or plastic sheets. These are also known as window sheets, and I've just gone ahead and cut these down. I've made these 4" by 4" squares, and I also have 2 3" squares, and I'm just using these smaller squares to show you the technique. But as you can see here, I actually like doing full sheets of this, and then I cut it down so that I can use it in different shapes and sizes on a lot of different projects. So the first technique I'm going to show you is how I created this piece here. So I'm just going to take one of my 4" squares, and we're going to be using alcohol ink. And alcohol ink has its own very special properties, so this won't work with regular ink. But these are by Adirondack. They're Tim Holtz Ranger Adirondack alcohol ink, and they come in a lot of different colors. And what you want to do is just take your colors and you want to make small drips on your transparency. And you can see I'm kind of shaking the bottle a little. And when the ink hits the transparency, as you can see, it's going to start to spread. And what's really neat about these inks is that they react or interact with one another. So if I go ahead and now bring in Wild Plum, so that first color was Sailboat Blue, and now I'm going to bring in a little bit of this Wild Plum color, and you'll see that where this ends up, it's going to start reacting a little bit and pushing the blue color away. So again, I'm just randomly placing this here onto my piece. And you don't have to be so random. I just really like the surprise and not really having much control. But you can try to do this in stripes or some kind of pattern to try to control things a little bit more. And now I'm going to bring in this color, which is called Stream, and I'm going to add that. And of course you could decide to cover your entire piece, or you might actually want to leave some clear or blank areas, because it could be really cool. As you can see on this card, I don't have anything behind the transparency, but you can kind of imagine doing some stamping behind the transparency, and that might look really fantastic. So again, you just keep going, and you can see that this ink is pushing, and different colors will do different things to other different colors. So I'm just adding a little bit more of this color, which is that Wild Plum. And then you just want to go ahead and let this dry. I actually like to let it dry overnight because I've put on quite a bit of ink, but if you just do a really thin layer and not so many colors one on top of the other, it dries relatively quickly. The other thing you want to know about alcohol inks is you may choose to wear gloves when you do this, because alcohol inks will stain your fingers, although I find that rubbing alcohol will take it off of my fingers, so I don't worry so much about staining my fingers. So I'm going to set this piece aside and we'll let that dry. So I've brought in my second 4" by 4" square of transparency, and I'm going to go ahead and use these same 3 colors just so you can see the different looks that can be created with the same 3 colors. But of course you can use whatever colors you want. And for this technique we're actually going to be using some canned air. This one's called Dust Remover. You can also buy generic brands at your office supply store, and it's normally used for cleaning your keyboard and your electronics, and we're going to use it here on our transparency. So I'm going to begin with the same color, this Sailboat Blue, and I'm just going to put a drop here in the middle, a couple drops actually, and then I'm just going to bring in my canned air, and I'm just going to spray my air. And you can see that it moves the ink around the transparency. And then of course we can move the transparency, add a bit more ink, and then use our air again to move it around the transparency. And hopefully you can see we're getting kind of a veiny look here. And here I let the ink go underneath the transparency, so that's just going to get on the reverse side. We can always remove that a little bit later with some alcohol, because alcohol will remove the alcohol ink. So I'm going to do one more try with this color. And the other nice thing about using this canned air is it actually dries your ink pretty quickly. And now let's go ahead and add our wild plum color. And once a color is dry, what's nice is that the canned air will go over that color and kind of form a new color. Whoops! As I blow the entire piece away, let's bring that back here. And actually that looks a little wet still, so we can move that around. And so it's a much more feathery kind of look that you can create by moving the ink around this way. If you didn't want it to be as pronounced, you could actually use a straw and your own breath if you didn't happen to have some canned air hanging around. And that'll give you also a blown look. You just won't, unless you can breathe really, really hard, you won't get as much of a little veiny look or feathery look as you do with the canned air. And I'm just going to put a piece of paper towel under here so you can see this just a little bit more clearly there. And now we have our third color to add. So I'm going to bring in our stream color. And you can see that one interacted with the color underneath and kind of took away some of what we had created. So you just have to experiment to see what these different colors will do to one another. And I think I'm just going to come back in with a tiny bit more of this sailboat blue here. And you can also add a technique on top of a technique. So you could go ahead and start dropping some color on this, like we did on the first piece of transparency, and that'll start to push things around and give you a totally different look. And I'm going to set that one aside to dry. And now for our last technique, I'm bringing in two pieces of transparency that are the same size, and these are both 3-inch square. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add all three of our colors to one of the transparencies. So I'm going to just add my color and drop it on here to the one that's on the right hand side. Just add all three colors here. And just like the drop technique before, these will interact with one another. And then what I'm going to do, once I've got all three of my colors down onto my piece, is I'm going to take the second piece and I'm just going to lay it right over the first piece, and I'm going to smush. Call this the smush technique. And yes, some of your ink is going to kind of come out the sides and you may have some air bubbles. And you can lift that right up, or I like to do a little twisting motion and then picking it up. And you can see I've gotten a whole bunch of ink on my fingers, so this is a little bit messy. So you might want to go ahead and use some type of glove. And then you can always come back in and kind of smush and twist again. And you can kind of get little striated lines, different things going on. And you can leave it or you can twist again. And then you want to go ahead and be patient and just set this aside to dry. And what you can do with this technique is, once it does dry, you can always come in and add additional ink. So of course now I'm pressing and pulling again, and you can see I'm getting a really kind of cool look. It looks like a cave to me. And that's how I actually created this sheet that I was showing you at the beginning. I did that by smushing two sheets together. So I just added a lot more color. And then of course you just want to let those dry. So there you have it, three very different looks that you can achieve with your alcohol inks. One, just dropping your ink on the transparency. This one using some canned air or a straw to blow air around so that you can move the ink across the transparency. And this I will officially call the smush technique, dripping onto one transparency and then taking another transparency and smushing that ink in between the two transparencies. I hope you've enjoyed these techniques, and I hope they inspire you to create some really wonderful cards, scrapbooking pages, and other paper crafting projects.